Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We feel police here indirectly supported those Khalistani groups.
The Sikhs are not protesting against a faith or any specific type of group. Our protests are against India and the Indian diplomats.
3 people are arrested after violence breaks out near a Hindu temple in Surrey amid tensions between Canada and India. Plus,
stay warm and just breathe deep.
heavy rain and strong winds rip across the south coast, knocking out power to hundreds of thousands of people.
British Columbia is still in the middle of a multi-year drought, so a lot of the vegetation is still quite dry.
And uncounted votes. Elections BC says it's discovered a ballot box that went uncounted in the provincial election and votes unreported in a crucial Surrey riding.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. On Sunday, we told you that Surrey RCMP reported the arrests of 3 people after violence broke out outside a Hindu temple, the Lakshmi Narayan Mandir. Now an official with that temple confirms the 3 are members of the congregation. They clashed with a group rallying in support of Khalistan, a proposed independent Sikh homeland in northern India. As Mira Baines reports, the conflicts are intensifying amid tensions between Canada and the Indian government.
This video taken on Sunday outside the Lakshmi Narayan Mandir shows police arresting a man. Khalistan supporters across the street had been protesting against Indian consular officials attending the Hindu temple. 3 people were arrested.
Violence broke out, which resulted in 3 individuals being arrested. Now, what I can tell you is that thankfully no one was injured during this incident.
No charges have been laid as an investigation continues. A Mandir official confirms they are members of its congregation. He claims police were heavy-handed with them.
We feel police here indirectly supported those Khalistani groups.
Parshottam Goel, who had been at the Mandir throughout Sunday, says people were worshipping and seniors were attending a consular camp to get important paperwork completed by Indian officials.
There is no civility, and under the guise of freedom of expression, whatever they come and set up things, and law enforcement agencies cooperate, not only cooperate, they bend backward to accommodate them.
Members of the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara in Surrey say they have been regularly holding peaceful protests in different locations after the murder of the Gurdwara's president, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
The Sikhs are not protesting against a faith or any specific type of group. Our protests are against India and the Indian diplomats who have now been labeled people of interest here in Canada for their ongoing violence against Sikh activists.
Singh alleges the counter-protesters from the Mandir were involved in assaulting a police officer. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau brought forward allegations of the Indian government being involved in Nijjar's shooting death in Surrey. India has denied the allegations and has refuted any links to extortion attempts targeting high-profile members of the Sikh community. A group of Sikhs who support Khalistan also protested at a Vancouver temple on Saturday. The Gurdwara had applied for a court-ordered buffer zone to prevent confrontations with protesters. No arrests were made there. Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke says she's upset by this incident and is calling for the Surrey community to remain calm and has reached out to BC Premier David Eby. Clashes in Ontario at Hindu temples near Brampton and Mississauga resulted in charges against 3 men. Indian officials are expected to return to places of worship later this month. Mira Baines, CBC News, Surrey.
And we'll have more on this story for you later in the show. Employers at BC ports are locking out more than 700 foremen across the province in response to strike activity by union members. The lockout will shutter terminals run by members of the BC Maritime Employers Association. Business leaders are concerned about the impact on Canada's supply chains. The employers say the lockout will not affect grain or cruise operations. On Sunday, the union said employers have overreacted to their limited job action. It said their intention is to restart talks that began almost 2 years ago, but have now stalled. More than 200,000 BC Hydro customers were without power throughout much of the day after heavy wind and strong rain ripped across the south coast. The storm knocked down trees, closed schools, and canceled ferries. And as Michelle Gassoub reports, this is just the start of storm season.
In Surrey's Crescent Beach, dog walkers made the most of conditions not for the faint of heart.
Love the wind. I came here especially today to be in the wind. I find it blows away all the negativity and it just energizes my soul in such a big way.
Surrey, White Rock, and the North Shore were particularly hard hit, the storm leaving thousands without power.
It's probably just the same temperature as the house right now. Right. And yeah, we had to go to the coffee shop. Very busy in the coffee shop because we're in the power outage area.
Wind gusts this strong turned trees and more into hazards.
In White Rock, about 14,000 customers are currently without service, and it's because of someone who lives in a high-rise. Their patio covering flew off in the wind and then ended up making contact with some electrical infrastructure.
At its peak, the storm cut power to over 200,000 people, and the winds are now moving through BC's interior.
Widespread winds right through the province of BC, and even where there's not wind warnings, we are still expecting moderate to strong gusty winds widespread through the province. This is a storm that's not just impacting one corner, but really moving through the entirety of BC.
This is just the start of storm season, and bone-dry conditions can make fall storms like this one more hazardous.
Storm season is really just getting started, and British Columbia is still in the middle of a multi-year drought. So a lot of the vegetation is still quite dry, and a lot of the trees still have leaves on them. And so it doesn't take a lot of wind to knock over some trees to make contact with power lines, and then that's how we get a majority of our power outages.
Still, for some, a reminder to stay on the sunny but gusty side of life.
Stay warm and just breathe deep.
Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Surrey.
The storm also walloped parts of Vancouver Island. Our Claire Palmer has more from Nanaimo.
Gale force winds limiting boat traffic. Dallas Road in Victoria closed as waves crash onto it. Both impacts of a major storm hitting Vancouver Island.
A potent storm has moved across the province of BC, and it's continuing to move through tonight and into the overnight period for the interior. We've seen very strong winds across the south coast, and there was widespread wind warnings stretching from the central coast of BC right down through Vancouver Island.
In Nanaimo, overnight rain and strong winds Monday morning caused travel delays, with BC Ferries issuing travel advisories on the North Island, with sailing delays out of Nanaimo due to the weather. Hullo Ferries also forced to cancel service today due to high winds.
We've already seen some wind gusts hitting 100 kilometers per hour. For instance, Victoria Gonzales reported, as of noon today, reported wind speeds of 108 kilometers per hour. Victoria Harbour came in at 100 kilometers per hour.
Ferry services are expected to return to normal sailings by Tuesday, with the storm expected to pass Monday night. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
Let's bring in our science and climate specialist Darius Madavi with a look at the weather and what blew across the south coast today. That's a lot of color moving.
A lot of color moving, but the purple is the important part. So this is not showing us the forecast because winds are now dying down. This is actually showing us what was modeled to happen earlier today. You can see a lot of purple, so the wind was expected. It was not out of the not out of the blue by any means. We still have several weather statements in place. We have a winter storm warning over here, special weather statement along the Coquihalla as well as over parts of Highway 3. So be aware of that. What happened earlier today, we'll talk a little bit more about later in the show, Dan, but definitely a major system, but some calmer weather on the way.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Elections BC says it has discovered a ballot box containing 861 votes not counted in the provincial election. It says the omission did not affect the result in Prince George Mackenzie, where that box was found. The agency says it also found 14 votes went unreported in the crucial riding of Surrey-Guildford, where a judicial recount is being held. Incumbent New Democrat Gary Begg won there by just 27 votes. Elections BC says the discovery of the anomaly there triggered a province-wide review. Conservative leader John Rustad says he now wants an independent look into BC's voting system, claiming the errors undermine public trust in the electoral process. However, Rustad says he's not disputing the final outcome after the judicial recounts. Pending those results, the NDP has 47 seats in the legislature, the slimmest margin possible for a majority. Now, of the 93 MLAs elected to the legislature in Victoria, 13 of them already have jobs as local elected politicians. That means by-elections will soon have to be held in several communities. But as Chad Pawson explains, it won't happen everywhere.
2 mayors, 6 city councillors, 4 school board trustees, and 1 local area director. They've all won a government upgrade to the legislature in Victoria, meaning resignations for some from their local roles, like Barriere Mayor Ward Stamer. He leaves local government after 17 years, saying he's excited to embark on this new journey as a Conservative MLA in Victoria. Deborah Toporowski will now represent the NDP in Victoria and leaves North Cowichan as a councillor, saying, "I look forward to continuing to serve the community in my new role." Experts who work with local governments say moves like these can follow political ambitions.
It's not uncommon in city governments and local governments to have elected officials use that office as a bit of a stepping stone to provincial or federal levels, typically provincial level.
Some of the 13 haven't yet resigned. Others say they're going to do both their elected jobs, like Misty Van Popta with the Township of Langley. She intends to finish out her term as a municipal councillor, arguing by-elections are costly and often have low voter turnout. She says there's little conflict between her two positions and that it's important to honor the position I was elected for in 2022. There are no rules in BC's Election Act prohibiting politicians from being elected in 2 places at once. Municipalities can set their own rules, however. Consultants who work with local governments say it can be tough to lose elected officials in the middle of terms, but those that stay on do have to find a delicate balance.
So I would want to be careful where those matters overlap, and I would want to be probably err on the side of caution and recuse myself from council discussions on a lot that had to do with intergovernmental relationships and appeals to Victoria.
So, when can communities requiring a by-election expect one? Well, once a councillor or a trustee resigns, local governments must appoint a chief elections officer, and that person must hold a by-election at least 80 days following their appointment. So, don't expect to head to the polls in your community until at least the new year. Chad Pawson, CBC News, Vancouver.
What would you do with a SkyTrain car? TransLink is asking for your help to come up with ways to relocate and repurpose the original fleet after 40 years of service. Janella Hamilton hopped aboard to get people's thoughts.
This is the Mark I, TransLink's oldest SkyTrain cars. But soon it will be the end of the line for 150 iconic cars just like this.
They are reaching the end of their service lifespan, and they're eventually, over the next couple of years, going to be replaced by Mark V SkyTrain cars. So we are trying to come up with a retirement plan for these cars, and that's why we need people's help on it.
How would you like to see these Mark I SkyTrain cars repurposed?
Maybe some sort of, like, I've seen the old decommissioned dining cars become a thing. Housing is always a necessity in the city.
I was actually thinking sending to maybe other countries that are not so fortunate, you know, like they may like to have to keep using.
I think a museum is probably just perfectly fine. Definitely the history of these old cars is something that I would be pretty interested in, I think.
What about turning it into a food truck-styled restaurant? Maybe a dance club? Or a wedding venue?
Historically, cities all over the world have repurposed their old vehicles and various fleets. They can be turned into community displays, used in playgrounds, art installations. They can be set up in museums and even turned into artificial reefs.
Since they were introduced during Expo 86, the Mark I SkyTrain cars have been used by millions of transit riders for nearly 40 years. But TransLink says by 2027, the SkyTrain's original fleet will be replaced. TransLink is hoping community organizations, developers, municipal governments, and people can come up with creative uses for at least some of the cars as legacy projects to commemorate their historical use on Metro Vancouver's rapid transit network. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Coming up, former Anishinaabe Senator Murray Sinclair, who led Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has died. We look back at his legacy and his work after this.
I think it's important to give a human face to the stories that we hear every day, the people that they affect. And I think talking to those people is what really gives us the true sense of the impact of the stories that we're hearing.
Tributes are pouring in from Canada and across the political divide for Murray Sinclair. His family says the former lawyer, judge, and senator died this morning surrounded by loved ones. He was 73. Sinclair spent much of his life fighting for fairness and justice for Indigenous people. He led the country's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where he confronted truths this country is still grappling with. Cameron McIntosh has more on Murray Sinclair's life and legacy.
There have always been those who are deniers of history.
A respected elder and statesman, Murray Sinclair laid the path for reconciliation in Canada.
And this nation must never forget what it once did to its most vulnerable people.
Born in 1951, raised in Selkirk, Manitoba, Sinclair's Anishinaabe name meant the one who speaks of pictures in the sky. He excelled in school, skipping 2 grades, was a star athlete and valedictorian, who went into law, originally aiming to enter politics.
I really became bitten by the law bug.
Racial hurdles were quickly apparent. As a young lawyer dealing with a client, a police officer mistook him for the accused.
He grabbed me by the arm and was going to lead me back to the cells because he assumed the white guy was the lawyer.
In 1988, Sinclair became Manitoba's first ever Indigenous provincial court judge. After a police killing of an Indigenous man, he was co-commissioner of a tension-filled inquiry into racism in Manitoba's justice system. He quickly felt backlash.
An RCMP officer came to my house and said, we have information that a City of Winnipeg police officer has threatened to kill you.
Nothing came of it. Sinclair kept asking hard questions. He rose to Queen's Bench and also led an inquest into the deaths of 12 infants in pediatric care in Manitoba. But it was the 2008 Truth and Reconciliation Commission where Sinclair cast the most light, spending 6 years listening to residential school survivors, uncovering truths he knew many would not want or be able to accept.
And the phrase I used to use with the staff is that we have to write this for the reasonable.
His 94 calls to action have brought some progress, particularly around awareness, but many remain unfulfilled.
The public still largely struggles with the question of what can we do about it.
Shortly after the TRC, he did get that career in politics, appointed as an independent senator in 2016. He served nearly 5 years, a platform he used to promote reconciliation.
I've been involved in the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Why can't you just get over it and move on? And my answer has always been, why can't you always remember this?
He turned down consideration for Governor General, citing a desire to spend time with his family, but was a member of the Order of Canada. Through it all, he became one of Canada's most respected Indigenous voices. A mentor to many, including Manitoba's first Anishinaabe Premier, through his career, Sinclair dealt with countless stories of pain, despair, and racism, but at his core, remained an optimist.
As long as we have that belief in the need to improve the future, then the future will be improved.
Change he acknowledged would be slow, but remained confident is inevitable. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Now, Judith Sayers, president of the New Chalnoth Tribal Council here in BC, spoke with CBC's The Early Edition about Sinclair's important work on the Calls to Action report.
It was a huge impact. I mean, today, everybody operates on the calls to action from the TRC in every area. It is something that has spawned reconciliation awards. It has put companies in different places. I mean, even BC Hydro has a reconciliation plan.
You can read more about Murray Sinclair's life and work on our main website, cbcnews.ca. There's a look at the day that was in Revelstoke, complete with a CPR train, don't you know? Which, like much of the lower mainland, saw some pretty wet weather today, and there's a bit of snow on the hill, with a chance of wet flurries of snow tomorrow. Our Darius Madavi will have your BC-wide weather forecast coming up. With our clocks falling back 1 hour on Sunday, our days are getting shorter, and it's the natural time for seasonal affective disorder, or SAD as it's known, to begin. Great acronym. Symptoms often appear in the fall and can continue through the spring. With us now to talk more about the disorder and how to treat it, if we can, CBC medical columnist Dr. Melissa Lim. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. What is SAD?
Well, seasonal affective disorder is a kind of depression that happens on a seasonal basis, typically in the fall and winter, but sometimes also in the spring and summer. And the thinking is that the research says that the changing light levels affect our circadian rhythms and can affect our mood. And some of those symptoms mirror the classic symptoms of depression, like low mood lasting for longer than a couple weeks at a time, lower interest and enjoyment, guilt or feelings of low self-esteem, problems with concentration, changes in appetite, and sometimes even thoughts of suicide or self-harm. And unfortunately, because in Canada we're at a higher latitude and further away from the equator, we're at higher risk for SAD. Up to 15% of Canadians will experience a milder form, and up to 3% will experience actual overt seasonal affective disorder.
How do you know when you're just dealing with SAD and when it's perhaps something more serious?
Well, it's normal to have a down day every now and then, but when those down days extend into many days at a time or multiple weeks, then you should be more concerned. And also when those symptoms start to affect your function at work or at school or at home. Another red flag is if you start increasing your use of substances, whether that's alcohol or cannabis or other recreational drugs. And then also if you are having more serious thoughts of self-harm or suicide, you should immediately speak with a health care professional. We also need to keep in mind that there are certain groups that are more susceptible to SAD. So these include women, youth, and also people with a family history of SAD or depression.
And in terms of treatment, what options are there?
Well, thankfully, there are some effective and safe treatments. And again, they mirror those effective treatments for depression. So that would include antidepressant medication, counseling, and psychotherapy. But we also have to remember that lifestyle interventions do form the core of any intervention for mental health, you know, even though it's easier said than done. So it's really important to try to focus on a healthy diet. Often people with SAD crave carbs and sugar because that spikes your serotonin in the short term, but then you get a crash after. Exercise outdoors is also really important, especially for at least half an hour a day, and then making sure you don't get too much sleep and not too little sleep, so aiming for 7 to 9 hours.
And is there anything to do, for example, with supplements? Because we know if we're getting less sunlight, maybe we're not getting the vitamin D that we need to. Do you recommend a supplement?
A certain supplement that you can indulge in is actually light therapy, and that's in fact thought to be, and shown by research, to be quite effective for SAD. So half an hour first thing when you wake up by one of those regulated light boxes, and there's actually research even showing that people with other forms of depression can benefit from light therapy as well.
All right. Dr. Melissa Lim, we always appreciate your time and your expertise, especially in this season. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Meteorologists are predicting a colder, wetter winter for BC this year. Welcome news for skiers and snowboarders after last year's dry spell. And as Michelle Gomez shows us, many are already gearing up for what's expected to be a snowy season.
With snow already falling in Whistler and on the local mountains, skiers and boarders are preparing for a white season.
People are excited for sure. Last year was really rough.
Staff at local ski shops are already noticing a busier year.
This weekend specifically, yeah, you know, the snow really started hitting. You could see it on the cams, and that's when people show up and start to get some gear and get ready for the season.
A nice change to definitely talk to people who are really stoked about it too. Yeah, definitely a lot busier than last season already.
The U.S. National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center is estimating a 60% chance of a La Niña winter, which causes slightly colder and wetter weather.
The forecast is turning out to be kind of weak La Niña, which is really good. Vancouver's going to be pretty miserable, but it's great for the local ski hills.
Pass sales at Seymour were slower this fall, says Whitehead, with people hesitant to buy after last winter. The North Shore Mountains struggled amidst dry and warm weather. It was a short season with multiple closures throughout the winter. But Whitehead says sales have picked up in the wake of recent forecasts, and they hope to open by mid-December.
So we still have a few left, but we expect they'll all be snapped up before we open.
Some diehard skiers have managed to find powder already this year, like Diego Bastardo.
So excited. I have so many videos right now. We're actually skiing yesterday. We hiked Seymour and we built a rail and stuff. It was so fun.
He says himself and his friends are excited for the snow to come.
The snow is going to be crazy this year. Yeah. I'm super stoked because I ski like full time. That's all I do.
Mountain cameras show snow on all 3 of the local mountains, and Whistler is preparing to open in just a few weeks. Michelle Gomez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Returning to our top story tonight, police in Ontario say they have arrested 3 men in connection with a series of violent demonstrations in the Toronto area over the weekend. One of them took place outside a Hindu temple, another at a Sikh Gurdwara. The CBC's Jamie Strachan has more.
Sunday at a Hindu temple in Brampton, just outside of Toronto, violence. After demonstrators arrived holding banners in support of Khalistan, a proposed independent Sikh homeland in northern India. The protest happened as Indian consular officials were inside helping people with pension documents, though protesters say those officials gather information about the Sikh community.
They start hitting those people. They went inside the gate, and you can see in the video they were hitting with the stick to the devotee.
Hours later, protesters gathered outside of a nearby Sikh place of worship, some waving Indian flags.
They want to take control of the Gurdwara and they want to harm worshippers.
3 people were arrested, though CBC News is not confirmed from which protest. And an off-duty police officer was suspended after he participated in the Hindu temple protest. In Surrey, British Columbia, similar demonstrations turned violent. Several people were arrested.
This is now sort of breaking out into fights and violence and attacks that are physical at these places of worship, whereas before it seemed to be acts of vandalism that happened in the middle of the night.
Particularly at places of prayer, that is just wrong.
In Canada, the violence was condemned at all political levels.
It should not be happening where people are attending to pray or attending to find peace, and to have violent clashes there is just completely wrong.
On X, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the violence unacceptable. But these local incidents were also noticed in India. Its Prime Minister condemned what he called a deliberate attack on a Hindu temple, adding that he expects the Canadian government to ensure justice and uphold the rule of law. Relations between the 2 countries are tense after Ottawa accused India of orchestrating attacks on Sikh activists on Canadian soil, including murder. India has denied the allegations. Meanwhile, in Brampton, a heightened police presence continues. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
There is anger in Alberta over a plan to cap greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector. Madeleine Cummings on the proposal and the fiery reaction.
We're the only large oil and gas producer in the world to do this.
Ottawa says new draft regulations are designed to cut greenhouse gas emissions from the production of oil and gas to 35% below 2019 levels, starting in 2030.
So we're asking the oil and gas sector to invest their record profits into pollution-cutting projects that can create and keep good jobs.
The government says it needs to act urgently to avoid the most severe effects of climate change. But energy company Cenovus calls it yet another punitive policy that could put Canadian companies at a competitive disadvantage. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers says the cap would deter investment and have serious negative consequences for the economy. Alberta's premier says Ottawa's timeline is too aggressive. Making references to the environment minister, she says it would be an economic disaster for Alberta.
This is a vendetta. Like, he has a deranged vendetta against Alberta. It's very obvious.
Danielle Smith says her government will fight the emissions cap in court. It's already fighting on the PR front with a $7 million ad campaign.
We say let common sense prevail. Tell the feds at scrapthecap.ca.
She doesn't have to convince the federal Conservatives, who have said the cap will kill jobs and raise the cost of energy. Environmental groups say the regulations target the country's biggest source of greenhouse gas pollution.
This is a really important step to start getting this crucial piece of policy implemented so we can see emissions come down.
The federal government says it will keep consulting on the draft regulations before publishing a final version next year. Madeleine Cummings, CBC News, Edmonton.
It is the final day of campaigning in the U.S. presidential election before voting day Tuesday. More on which states to watch after this. People across Canada and the world are waiting for tomorrow's big event in the U.S. It is Presidential Election Day in a country that in some places is deeply divided and on edge. Today, both candidates are in the most crucial swing state of all, Pennsylvania.
Tomorrow, you have to stand up and tell Kamala that you've had enough. You're not going to take it anymore. You're the most incompetent vice president we've ever had.
Let's enjoy this moment to knock on a neighbor's door and in their face, even if we've not met them, know that we have a lot that we care about in common and that we are optimistic about the future of our country.
Meanwhile, major security preparations are underway across Washington, D.C. Fencing is up around businesses, the White House, and the president's official residence. Security will also be tightened around Howard University. It is Harris's alma mater and the site of her election night gathering. Donald Trump is planning a big election night party near his estate in West Palm Beach, Florida. And along with that comes a host of security challenges. Chris Reyes is nearby with a look at how authorities are getting ready.
Security preparations are already underway at the Palm Beach County Convention Center, where the Trump campaign is holding a big watch party on election night.
While we don't expect or want any trouble or issues, I just want to let everyone know that if you are thinking about or planning on coming to our great city to cause problems, don't do it. It won't end well for you.
Security measures will include road closures and increased police presence, especially in the downtown area.
I'm going to bring a couple correctional buses down there, which is a nice name for jail. So if at the slightest inclination that things are getting ready to heat up and get out of hand, we're going to stop it real early.
At Mar-a-Lago, this is as close as supporters could get to Trump's estate.
Hopefully, it can be a peaceful transfer of power, if there is a transfer of power. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to contain it. We have a good sheriff's department here.
This country has got to be united. We're not going to get nowhere.
Expect security to really intensify when Trump arrives. He's expected to vote here on Tuesday. Chris Reyes, CBC News, West Palm Beach, Florida.
Michigan is one of the other most competitive battlegrounds in the U.S. election, with pollsters declaring it a virtual tie. But with a large Arab American population and black voting bloc, there are several key issues in the swing state that could alter the dynamics of the race. The CBC's Susan Ormiston has more from Grand Rapids.
It's tight. Michigan was won by Joe Biden back in 2020 and by Donald Trump in 2016. And projections show that this vote today is less than a percentage point gap between Harris and Trump. In the leafy suburbs of West Bloomfield near Detroit, there are dueling campaign signs and divided homes.
It's very scary here, and we're kind of a house divided. I have two younger daughters. My husband, not so sure. Three of us are trying to convince him to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Her husband favors Trump.
I think for him, it's more about, I'm just going to say it, money. And Trump has this big, platform and always talks about how he's going to, he's a businessman, he can make money and get this country right.
Kamala Harris spent much of her Sunday in Michigan, and we caught up with voters straining to catch a glimpse of the woman who's inspiring them.
I'm excited to see this. This is history.
This is what?
History in the making.
She brings about the change that we need. She brings about the advancement that we need so that we become a better people, a better nation.
But support has weakened among Arab Americans, a large community here in Michigan, angry and frustrated over the Biden-Harris response to the Gaza war. Democrats are worried, too, about the black vote. At a church in Detroit, the pastor is preaching to help get out the vote, and he's made it clear he's going for Trump.
We're intelligent people. We've pledged our allegiance to the Democratic Party for long enough. We've given them opportunities. In this time, we're not doing it this time.
Not all of his congregation supports him. In fact, one man quietly told us that some of the members of the church have left because of this. The election is tearing at this country, and in some ways the vote can't come soon enough. Tonight, Donald Trump will be here at a big rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan. People are lined up for hours to get to see his final campaign rally. After 9 years of campaigning to be president, this is it. The last address to Americans to try to persuade them he's the right candidate for president. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Israel has announced its formal termination of an agreement with the United Nations to facilitate aid work in Gaza. As Sasha Petrusik explains, this comes 3 months after the UN aid agency fired several employees for possible involvement in the massacre in Israel last year.
The Israeli government submitted a notice to the United Nations today saying that it is going to cut ties with UNRWA. That's an organization, the main organization, that provides help to Palestinian refugees. And it's been doing this for decades now. For decades also, the Israeli government has said that this organization has unacceptable ties to Hamas, the militant organization that has been running Gaza and that was behind the attacks against Israel last October 7th. So Israel passed legislation last week here in Israel saying that UNRWA will not be able to operate within about 60 to 90 days. That set the clock ticking, and this is the next step in that direction. Now, this could have incredible repercussions inside Gaza in particular, where UNRWA has been the main organization delivering food aid, medical aid, and providing shelter to Palestinians. UNRWA denies Israel's accusations that it is connected to Hamas. It denies that it allows Hamas to use its facilities for military purposes, and says that it is absolutely critical that it continue providing aid, especially food aid, at a time when many nations have said that not enough is getting in. This is how the people who are receiving that aid put it.
بالدور يعني بالدور وبالكب والله اللقمة العيش هم نحرق لما نروح نجيبها من هالأطفال الجعانين أطفالنا. إحنا أصلا جعانين إحنا عايزين الأكل عايزين الشرب كلهم والله خبيز وفش عنا إحنا إلنا شهر من يوم ما انقطع الحين مش قادرين نجيبه بمليون ونص إحنا هنا عايشين على البكية.
Now, Israel has said it will find other ways to get this aid into Gaza, especially food aid. It says that it will work with other organizations, or perhaps it will do it itself. But so far, it has not presented any kind of public plan. And the clock is ticking because there is only a maximum of about 90 days before it says it's going to pull the plug for good on UNRWA. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Spain is deploying more soldiers to the eastern part of that country to help in the recovery efforts of deadly floods that have caused catastrophic damage. At least 217 people have died in the disaster, most of them in and around Valencia. The death toll has sparked public outrage over what some say was insufficient warning and support from authorities. This is considered the deadliest storm in Spain's history. Darius Badavi is here with our BC-wide weather forecast and some warnings and statements already.
Yes, that's right. The wind warnings we had up and down the coast, especially the south coast, have now dropped. This happened just a few minutes before I came up here the first time. We have a special weather statement in place for parts of the highway system. The mountain passes under winter storm warnings in the south, so just be aware of that. Lots of snow coming to parts of the interior. We just can't see it all on here because we don't have radar coverage everywhere. But this is the past 24 hours. I just wanted to highlight that storm rolling into the south coast, how much rain we got, and those really strong winds. If we take a look on this view instead, this is the water vapor view of the radar. And basically what I want to highlight is two features here, because I think there's two terms that you might hear in the days ahead about what this actual storm was, or maybe you have heard them already. The first is bomb cyclone. And bomb cyclone sounds very dramatic, but we've been calling fast developing storms weather bombs for since the 1950s. It really just, the term bomb cyclone is a technical definition that basically just means that it developed very quickly. It's a very fast developing low, dropped a certain amount in terms of its pressure in under 24 hours. So that's what bomb cyclone means. The other one that you might hear is sting jet. And this one's a little bit trickier to see, but you can see the cyclone moving in there, and there's the sting jet coming in. Sting jets are a feature with our sort of weather here on the coast that usually bring us our strongest winds. It's a fairly narrow corridor of air that blows through, and that's why we got such strong winds this time around, along with the storm itself. Now, in the days ahead, we're going to see much calmer weather, at least until we get to the end of the week. We saw that ridge of high pressure build in, and then a series of lows move across the province for the weekend. So here's that ridge of high pressure. That means calmer, sunnier weather over the next couple of days, at least in southern BC. And then we have those lows move through that should bring probably a wetter weekend. You can see that here in terms of that precipitation, most of it confined up into the north as that ridge keeps most of southern BC dry until we get into Friday and the weekend, and then that storm starts to roll in. In terms of our highs over the next few days, nothing too out of the ordinary. Expect to see fairly seasonal conditions in many places, actually a little bit above normal today, but then falling a little bit as we head into the days ahead because that ridge of high pressure usually brings cooler weather in the winter. In terms of conditions across the province tomorrow, still a little bit unsettled, especially up in the northwest, but everywhere else fairly calm. The southeast may be getting the odd flurry very early in the morning. And then in terms of a 5-day forecast, Dan, again, a few days of calm, and then the rain returns for the weekend.
Okay, study in contrast. How about a deep breath?
Yes.
Maybe it'll be okay Monday. Darius, you're here with some encouraging news about life expectancy worldwide.
Yes, that's right, Dan. And I think one of the things that we really focus on in this series of Maybe It'll Be Okay Monday is these very long-term trends that don't really get a lot of coverage because news is very much event-based. And so these really long-term goals that we try and reach and progress that we make doesn't usually get a lot of attention. And so I want to highlight, this is a graph showing since 1950 how life expectancy has improved around the world. And you can see generally increasing virtually everywhere for a very long time. So this is 40 years. If we keep rolling it forward, aside from a few blips with major events that happened in a few parts of the world, like Africa or Asia back there, we really see it continue to improve until we hit 2019. And then in 2020, we see a drop for the first time, pretty much worldwide in a very, very long time. We see that again in 2021. But in 2022, we started to see a rebound. And with the new data from the UN that just came out, 2023, we see it increasing again, reaching once again the peak for life expectancy around the world. So Dan, we are back on track. And again, maybe it'll be okay.
There you go. Thank you, Darius.
Thank you.
Experiments, aerodynamics, and more. Women and girls are underrepresented in many science and tech sectors. So Science World put on an event to fix that. We'll take you there next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
Save the date and join us on Friday, December 6th at CBC's Make the Season Kind in support of food banks in British Columbia. The annual charity drive is filled with special programming and festive activities. Looking forward to seeing you on December 6th. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver Inbox.
Hundreds of kids were at Science World over the weekend for the 7th Annual Girls and STEAM Summit.
As Stephanie Mercier reports, the event aims to get more girls and women interested in careers where they're typically underrepresented.
Turn the microscope on. Microscope on, slide in, focus, and learn. This workshop is one of several happening at Vancouver's Science World as part of the Girls in STEAM Summit, an annual gathering to inspire young people to consider careers in science, technology, engineering, arts and design, and math.
I learned how to find different blood types.
I like buildings and how to build them and structures and how to support them.
300 girls ages 12 to 14 are here checking out the workshops and showcases.
Everything from building a parachute to stop your egg from cracking through to LiDAR scans and earthquake testing as well. So it's a really fun day.
Fun and hopefully inspirational. Organizers say women still make up just under a quarter of entrants into STEM bachelor programs in Canada. Events like this are trying to change that.
I'm excited to encourage them within my speech to reach beyond what they may believe they're capable of currently. I want to expand their world and encourage them to get into fields that they might have not thought about.
I'm Maranke Harris. I am a deep sea explorer and oceanographer.
The keynote speaker says getting more girls and women involved means new ideas.
We're losing out on a lot of innovation by not having as many diverse perspectives entering these fields, because diverse perspectives are what breed innovation.
And the path to innovation can come from an experience.
I think that everyone should get to experience something like this once in their life because it's just so eye-opening, and here's where I really learned my passion for biology and medicine.
That's a very cool prediction. Anybody else got anything for me? Yeah.
This year's theme is Future Forward. These kids are thinking about just that.
I would like to be a pediatrician and possibly a neurologist, like a neuropediatrician.
Something in the science area, like designing buildings maybe, architecture.
These girls steaming ahead to their own bright futures. Stephanie Mercier, CBC News, Vancouver.
Looks so good.
Oh, amazing.
So fun.
Love that.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, YouTube, and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
We'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock right after the national. And CBC News will have full coverage of the U.S. presidential election starting tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific. So please join us then. Good night.